Chapter 5. On arriving at the depot, my nerve failed me. I was afraid to go in. I didn't know what I was scared of, but I was scared. Before going around to the front, I peeked in a window. The station master was in his office looking at some papers. He was wearing a funny little cap that had no top in it. He looked friendly enough, but I still couldn't muster up enough courage to go in. I cocked my ear to see if I could hear puppies crying, but I could hear nothing. A bird started chirping. It was a yellow canary in a cage. The station master walked over and gave it some water. I thought, anyone that is kind to birds surely wouldn't be mean to a boy. With my courage built up, I walked around to the front and eased myself past the office. He glanced at me and turned back to the papers. I walked clear around the depot and again walked slowly past the office. Glancing from the corner of my eye, I saw the station master looking at me and smiling. He opened the door and came out on the platform. I stopped and leaned against the building. Yawning and stretching his arms, he said, "Sure is hot today. Doesn't look like it's ever going to rain." I looked up at the sky and said, "Yes, sir, it is hot, and we sure could do with a good rain. We need one bad up where I'm from." He asked me where I lived. I told him, "Oh, up the river a ways." "You know," he said, "I have some puppies in there for a boy that lives up on the river. His name is Billy Coleman. I know he's dad, but I have never seen the boy. I figured he would come in after them today." On hearing this remark, my heart jumped clear up in my throat. I thought surely it was going to hop right out on the depot platform. I looked up and tried to tell him who I was, but something went wrong. When the words finally came out, they sounded like the squeaky old pulley on her well when Mama drew up a bucket of water. I could see a twinkle in the station master's eyes. He came over and laid his hands on my shoulder. In a friendly voice, he said, "So you're Billy Coleman. How's your dad?" I told him Papa was fine and handed him the slip my grandpa had given me. "They sure are fine-looking pups," he said. "You'll have to go around to the freight door." I'm sure my feet never touched the ground as I flew around the building. He unlocked the door, and I stepped in looking for my dogs. I couldn't see anything but boxes, barrels, old trunks, and some rolls of barbed wire. The kindly station master walked over to one of the boxes. "Do you want box and all?" he asked. I told him I didn't want the box. All I wanted was the dogs. "How you going to carry them?" he asked. "I think they're a little too young to follow." I held out my gunny sack. He looked at me and looked at the sack. Chuckling, he said, "Well, I guess dogs can be carried that way, same as anything else. But we'll have to cut a couple of holes to stick their heads through so they won't smother." Getting a claw hammer, he started tearing off the top of the box. As nails gave way and boards splintered, I heard several puppy whimpers. I didn't walk over. I just stood and waited. After what seemed like hours, the box was open. He reached in, lifted the pups out, and set them down on the floor. "Well, there they are," he said. "What do you think of them?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at them. They seemed to be blinded by the light and kept blinking their eyes. One sat down on his little rear and started crying. The other was waddling around and whimpering. I wanted so much to step over and pick them up. Several times I tried to move my feet, but they seemed to be nailed to the floor. I knew the pups were mine, all mine, yet I couldn't move. My heart started acting like a drunk grasshopper. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My Adam's apple wouldn't work. One pup started my way. I held my breath. On he came until I felt a scratchy little foot on mine. The other pup followed, a warm puppy tongue caressing my sore foot. I heard the station master say, "They already know you." I knelt down and gathered them in my arms. I buried my face between their wriggling, wiggling bodies and cried. The station master, sensing something more than just two dogs and a boy, waited in silence. Rising, with the 2 pups held close to my chest, I asked if I owed anything. He said, "There's a small feed bill, but I'll take care of it. It's not much anyway." Taking his knife, he cut 2 slits in the sack. He put the pups in it and worked their heads through the holes. As he handed the sack to me, he said, "Well, there you are. Goodbye and good hunting." Walking down the street toward town, I thought, now, maybe the people won't stare at me when they see what I've got. After all, not every boy owns 2 good hounds. Turning the corner onto the main street, I threw out my chest. I hadn't gone far before I realized that the reception I got wasn't what I thought it would be. People began to stop and stare. Some even snickered. I couldn't understand why they were staring. Surely it couldn't be at the 2 beautiful hound pups sticking out of the gunny sack. Thinking that maybe I had a hole in the seat of my britches, I looked over my reflection in the plate glass window. I craned my neck for a better view of my rear. I could see a patch there all right, and a few threadbare spots, but no whiteness was showing through. I figured that the people were just jealous because they didn't have 2 good hounds. I saw a drunk coming. He was staggering all over the street. Just as he was passing me, I heard him stop. As I looked back, I saw he was staring wide-eyed at my sack. Closing his eyes, he rubbed them with his hands. Opened them again, he stared, shaking his head. He staggered on down the street. All around, people began to roar with laughter. Someone shouted, "What's the matter, John? You seeing things today?" I hurried on, wanting to get away from the stares and the snickers. It wouldn't have happened again in 100 years. But there they came, the same 2 old women I had met before. We stopped and had another glaring fight. One said, "I declare." The other one snorted, "Well, I never." My face burned. I couldn't take it any more after all. A man can stand so much and no more. And in a loud voice I said, "You may have these people fooled with those expensive-looking feathers in your hats, but I know what they are. They're goose feathers painted with iodine." One started to say something, but her words were drowned out by the roaring laughter from all around. Gathering up their long skirts, they swished on down the street. All around me, people began to shout questions and laugh. One wanted to know if I had the mother in the sack. Storekeeper stepped out and gawked. I could see the end of the street, but it looked as if it were 100 miles away. My face was as red as a fox's tail. I ducked my head, tightened my grip on the sack, and walked on. I don't know where they came from, but like chickens coming home to roost, they flocked around me. Most of them were about my age. Some were a little bigger, some smaller. They ganged around me, screaming and yelling. They started clapping their hands and chanting, "The dog boy has come to town, the dog boy has come to town." My heart burst. Tears came rolling. The day I had waited for so long had turned black and ugly. The leader of the gang was about my size. He had a dirty, freckled face, and his 2 front teeth were missing. I suppose he lost them in a back alley fight. His shock of yellow sunburnt hair bobbed up and down as he skipped and jumped to the rhythm of a dog boy song. He wore a pair of cowboy boots. They were 2 sizes too big for him, no doubt handed down by an older brother. He stomped on my right foot. I looked down and saw a drop of blood ooze out from underneath the broken nail. It hurt like the dickens, but I gritted my teeth and walked on. Freckleface pulled the ear of my little girl pup. I heard her painful cry. That was too much. I hadn't worked 2 hard years for my pups to have some freckle-faced punk pull their ears. Swinging the sack from my shoulder, I walked over and set it down in a doorway. As I turned around to face the mob, I doubled up my fist and took a Jack Dempsey stance. Freckleface said, "So you want to fight?" He came in a swinging. I reached way back in Arkansas somewhere, and by the time my fist had traveled all the way down to the Cherokee Strip, there was a lot of power behind it. Smack on the end of Freck's nose, it exploded. With a loud Grunt! He sat down on the dusty street. Grabbing his nose in both hands, he started rocking and a-moaning. I saw the blood squeeze out between his fingers. Another one sailed in. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to wrestle. He stuck a finger in my mouth. I ground down. Shaking his hand and yelling like the hoot owls were after him, he ran across the street. Another one bored in. I aimed for his eye, but my aim was a little low, and I caught him in the Adam's apple. A sick look came over his face. Bending over, croaking like a bullfrog that had been caught by a water moccasin, he started going around in a circle. But there were too many of them. By sheer weight and numbers, they pulled me down. I managed to twist over on my stomach and buried my face in my arms. I could feel them beating and kicking my body. All at once, the beating stopped. I heard loud cries from the gang. Turning over on my back, I was just in time to see the big old marshal plant a number 12 boot in the seat of the last kid. I just knew I was next. I wondered if he'd kick me while I was down. I lay where I was. He stared toward me. I closed my eyes. I felt a hand as big as an anvil clamp on my shoulder. I thought, he's going to stand me up and then knock me down. He raised me up into a sitting position. His deep, friendly voice said, "Are you all right, son?" I opened my eyes. There was a smile on his wide, rugged face. In a choking voice, I said, "Yes, sir, I'm all right." He helped me to my feet. His big hand started brushing the dust off my clothes. "Those kids are pretty tough, son," he said, "but they're really not bad. They'll grow up someday." "Marshal," I said, "I wouldn't have fought them, but they pulled my pup's ears." He looked over to my sock. One pup had worked its way almost out through the hole. The other one's head and two little paws were sticking out. Both of them were whimpering. A smile spread over the big marshal's face. "So, that's what started the fight," he said. Walking over, he knelt down and started petting the pups. "They're fine-looking dogs," he said. "Where'd you get them?" I told him I'd ordered them from Kentucky. "What'd they cost you?" he asked. $40, I said. He asked if my father had bought them for me. "No," I said. "I bought them myself." He asked me where I got the money. "Well, I worked and saved it," I said. "Takes a long time to save $40, he said. "Yes, sir," I said. "Took me 2 years." "2 years!" he exclaimed. I saw an outraged look come over the marshal's face. Reaching up, he brushed his hat back. He glanced up and down the street. I heard him mutter, "There's not a one of that bunch with that kind of grit." Picking up my sock, I said, "Thanks for helping me out. I guess I'd better be heading for home." He asked where I lived. I said, "Up the river a way." "Well, you got time for a bottle of pop before you go, haven't you?" I started to say no, but looking at his big, friendly smile, I smiled back and said, "I guess I have." Walking into the general store, the marshal went over to a large red box and pulled back the lid. He asked what kind I wanted. I'd never had a bottle of pop in my life, and I didn't know what to say. Seeing my hesitation, he said, "This here strawberry looks pretty good." I said that would be fine. The cool pop felt wonderful to my hot, dry throat. My dark little world had brightened up again. I had my pups. I had a wonderful friend. I knew the stories I had heard about marshals weren't true. Never again would I be scared when I saw one. Back out on the street, I shook hands with the marshal, saying as I did, "If you're ever up in my part of the country, come over and see me. You can find our place by asking at my grandfather's store." "Store?" he asked. "Why, the only store upriver's about 30 miles from here." "Yes, sir," I said. "That's my grandpa's place." He asked if I was afoot. "Yes," I said. "You won't make it tonight," he said. "Will you?" "No," I said. "I intend to camp out somewhere." I saw he was bothered. "I'll be all right," I said. "I'm not scared of the mountains." He looked at me and at my pups. Taking off his hat, he scratched his head. Chuckling down deep in his barrel-like chest, he said, "Yeah, I guess you will be all right. Well, goodbye. Good luck. If you're ever in town again, look me up." From far down the street, I looked back. The marshal was still standing there, where I'd left him. He waved his big hand, and I waved back. On the outskirts of town, I stopped, picked up a can and my provisions. I hadn't gone far before I realized that I had undertaken a tough job. The sack became heavier and heavier. For a while, my pups cried and whimpered. They had long since pulled their heads back in the sack. I would peek in at them every once in a while. They were doing all right, curled up in two little round balls on my bundles. They were fast asleep. Deep in the heart of the Sparrowhawk Mountains, night overtook me. There, in a cave, with a stream close by, I put up for the night. Taking my pups and bundles from the gunny sack, I used it to gather leaves to make us a bed. My pups followed me on every trip, whimpering and crying, tumbling and falling over sticks and rocks. After the bed was made, I built a fire. In a can of water from the mountain stream, I boiled 3 eggs. Next, I boiled half of the remaining salt pork. Cutting the meat up in small pieces, I fed it to my pups. Each of us had a piece of candy for dessert. My pups enjoyed the candy. With their needle-sharp teeth, they gnawed and worried with it until it was melted away. While they were busy playing, I dragged up several large timbers and built a fire that would last for hours. In a short time, the cave grew warm and comfortable from the heat. The leaves were soft and felt good to my tired body and sore feet. As I lay stretched out, my pups crawled all over me. I played with them. They would waddle up to the front of the cave, look at the fire, and come scampering back to roll and play in the soft leaves. I noticed the boy dog was much larger than the girl dog. He was a deeper red in color. His chest was broad and solid. His puppy muscles nodded and rippled under the velvety skin. He was different in every way. He would go closer to the fire. I saw right away he was bold and aggressive. Once he went around the fire and ventured out into the darkness. I waited to see if he would come back. He came wobbling to the mouth of the cave, but hesitated there. He made several attempts to come back, but the flames were leaping higher by the minute. The space between the fire and the wall of the cave was much hotter than when he had ventured out. Whimpering and crying, he kept trying to get around the fire. I said not a word and just watched. Puppy though he was, he did something which brought a smile to my face. Getting as close as he could to the side of the cave, he turned his rear to the fire, hopping sideways, yipping at every jump. He made it through the heat and sailed into the pile of leaves. He had had enough. Curling up in a ball close to me, he went to sleep. The girl pup was small and timid. Her legs and body were short. Her head was small and delicate. She must have been the runt of the litter. I didn't have to look twice to see what she lacked in power, she made up in brains. She was a much smarter dog than the boy dog, more sure of herself, more cautious. I knew when the trail became tough, she would be the one to unravel it. I knew I had a wonderful combination. In my dogs, I had not only the power, but the brains along with it. I was a tired boy. My legs were stiff and my feet sore and throbbing. My shoulders were red and raw from the weight of the sack. I covered my pups up in the leaves and moved my body close to them as I could. I knew as night wore on and the fire died down, the chill would come. Tired but happy, I fell asleep. Along in the silent hours of the night, I was awakened. I opened my eyes, but didn't move. I lay and listened, trying to figure out what it was that had aroused me. At first, I thought one of my pups had awakened me by moving and whimpering. I discarded this thought, for I could see that they were both fast asleep. I decided it was my imagination working. My fire had burned down, leaving only a glowing red body of coals. The cave was dark and silent. Chill from the night had crept in. I was on the point of getting up to rebuild my fire when I heard what had awakened me. At first, I thought it was a woman screaming. I listened. My heart began to pound. I could feel the strain all over my body as nerves grew tighter and tighter. It came again, closer this time. The high pitch of the scream shattered the silence of the quiet night. The sound seemed to be all around us. It screamed its way into the cave and rang like a blacksmith's anvil against the rock walls. The blood froze in my veins. I was terrified. Although I had never heard one, I knew what it was. It was the scream of a mountain lion. The big cat screamed again. Leaves boiled and stirred where my pups were. In the reflection of the glowing coals, I could see that one was sitting up. It was a boy dog. A leaf had become entangled in the fuzzy hair of a floppy ear. The ear flicked and the leaf dropped. Again, the hellish scream rang out over the mountains. Leaves flew as my pup left the bed. I jumped up and tried to call him back. Reaching the mouth of the cave, he stopped. Raising his small red head high in the air, he bawled his challenge to the devil cat. The bawl must have scared him as much as it startled me. He came tearing back. The tiny hairs on his back were standing on end. My father had told me lions were scared of fire. I started throwing on more wood. I was glad I'd dragged up a good supply while making camp. Hearing a noise from the bed, I looked back. The girl pup, hearing the commotion, had gotten up and joined the boy dog. They were sitting side by side, with their bodies stiff and rigid, their beady little eyes bored into the darkness beyond the cave. The moist tips of their little black noses wiggled and twisted as if trying to catch a scent. What I saw in my pups gave me courage. My knees quit shaking and my heart stopped pounding. I figured the lion had scented my pups. The more I thought about anything harming them, the madder I got. I was ready to die for my dogs. Every time the cat screamed, the boy dog would run to the mouth of the cave and bawl back at him. I started whooping and throwing rocks down the mountainside, hoping to scare the lion away. Through the long hours of the night, I kept this up. The lion prowled around us, screaming and growling, first on the right, then on the left, and above and below. In the wee hours of morning, he gave up and left to stalk other parts of the mountain. I'm sure he thought he didn't stand a chance against two vicious hounds and a big hunter. Chapter 6. After a terrifying night, the bright morning sun was a welcome sight. I fixed breakfast, and soon we were on our way. I tried to get the pups to follow me, so as to lighten my load. They would for a way, and then, sitting down on their rears, they would cry and whimper. Back in the sack they would go, with their heads sticking out of the holes and their long ears flopping. I moved on. About midday, I entered country I knew. I wasn't far from home. I dropped down out of the mountains into the bottoms, far above the place I had crossed the river on my way to town. Staying to the left of the river, I followed its course past several campgrounds, but didn't stop until I came to the one where I found the magazine. Here, I took the pups out of the sack and sat down in the warm sand. As the afternoon wore on, I sat there, deep in thought. I was trying to think of what I was going to tell my mother and father. I could think of nothing. Finally, I decided I would just tell them the truth, and with the help of the new overalls, cloth, and candy, I would weather the storm. My pups were having a big time playing. With their little front paws locked around each other, they were growling and rolling and chewing on one another. They looked so cute. I laughed out loud. While I was watching their romping, the thought came, I haven't named them yet. I went over the list of names. For him, I tried Red, Bugle, Lead, name after name as before. For her, I tried Susie, Mabel, Queen, all kinds of girl names. None seemed to fit. Still mumbling names over and over, I glanced up. There, carved in the white bark of a sycamore tree, was a large heart, and in the center of the heart were two names, Dan and Ann. The name Dan was a little larger than Ann. It was wide and bold. The scar stood out more. The name Ann was small, neat, and even. I stared unbelieving, for there were my names. They were perfect. I walked over and picked up my pups. Looking at him, I said, Your name is Dan. I'll call you Old Dan." Looking at her, I said, "Your name, little girl, is Ann. I'll call you Little Ann." It was then I realized it was all too perfect. Here in this fisherman's camp, I had found the magazine and the ad. I looked over at the old sycamore log. There, I had asked God to help me get 2 hound pups. There were the pups, rolling around and playing in the warm sand. I thought of the old KC baking powder can and the fishermen, how freely they had given their nickels and dimes. I looked up to the names carved in the big tree. Yeah, it was all there like a large puzzle, piece by piece. Each fit perfectly until the puzzle was complete. It could not have happened without the help of an unseen power. I stayed at the campground until dark. I knew I had to go home, but I put it off as long as I could. The crying of the pups telling me they were hungry made up my mind for me. I knew the time had come for me to face my mother and father. I socked up my dogs and waded the river. As I came out of the bottoms, I could see the lamplight glow from the windows of our home. One of the small yellow squares darkened for an instant. Someone had walked across the floor. I wondered who it was. I heard Daisy, our milk cow, moo. I was thinking so hard of what I would say, it startled me for a second. Reaching the gate to our house, I stopped. I had never thought our home very pretty, but that night it looked different. It looked clean and neat and peaceful, nestled there in the foothills of the Ozarks. Yes, on that night, I was proud of our home. My bare feet made no noise as I crossed the porch. With my free hand, I reached and pulled the lever that worked the latch. Slowly, the door swung inward. I couldn't see my father or sisters. They were too far to the right of me, but my mother was directly in front of the door, sitting in her old cane-bottom rocker, knitting. She looked up. I saw all the worry and grief leave her eyes, her head bowed down. The knitting in her hands came up to cover her face. I stepped inside the room. I wanted to run to her and comfort her and tell her how sorry I was for the worry and the grief I'd caused her. The booming voice of my father shook me from my trance. He said, "Well, what have you got there?" Laughing, he got up from his chair and came over to me. He reached and took the sack from my shoulder. "When we started looking for you," he said, "I went to the store and your grandpa told me all about it. It wasn't too hard to figure out what you'd done, but you should have told us." I ran to my mother and, dropping to my knees, I buried my face in her lap. As Mama patted my head, I heard her say in a quavering voice, "Oh, why didn't you tell us? Why?" I couldn't answer. Between sobs, I heard the squeals of delight from my sisters as they fondled my pups. I heard my father say, "What's this other stuff you've got?" Without raising my head from my mother's lap, in a choking voice, I said, "One's for you, one's for Mama, and the other's for the girls." I heard the snapping of strings and the rattle of paper, and the oohs and ahs from my sisters were wonderful to hear. Papa came over to Mama. Laying the cloth on the arm of her chair, he said, "Well, you've been wanting a new dress. Here's enough cloth to make half a dozen dresses." Realizing that everything was forgiven, I stood up and dried my eyes. Papa was pleased with his new overalls. My sisters forgot the pups for the candy. The light that was shining from my mother's eyes as she fingered the cheap cotton cloth was something I'll never forget. Mama warmed some milk for the pups. They drank until their little tummies were tight and round. As I ate, Papa sat down at the table and started talking man talk to me. He asked, "How are things in town?" I told him it was boiling with people. The wagon yard was full of wagons and teams. He asked if I'd seen anyone I knew. I told him I hadn't, but the station master had asked about him. He asked me where I'd spent the night. I told him about the cave in the Sparrowhawk Mountains. He said that must have been the one called Robber's Cave. My youngest sister piped up, "Did you stay all night with some robbers?" My older sister said, "Oh, silly, that was a long time ago. There aren't any robbers there now." The other one put her nickel's worth in. Weren't you scared? No, I said. I wasn't scared of staying in the cave, but I heard a mountain lion scream and it scared me half to death. Ah, they won't bother you, Papa said. You had a fire, didn't you? I said, yeah. He said, they'll never bother you unless they're wounded or cornered. But if they are, you better look out. Papa asked me how I liked town. I said I didn't like it at all, and I wouldn't live there even if they gave it to me. With a querying look on his face, he said, I'm afraid I don't understand. I thought you always wanted to go to town. I did, I said, but I don't anymore. I don't like the people there, and I couldn't understand them. Well, what was wrong with them? He asked. I told him how they'd stared at me, and had even laughed and made fun of me. He said, oh, I don't think they were making fun of you, were they? Yes, they were, I said, and to beat it all, the boys jumped on me and knocked me down in the dirt. If it hadn't been for the marshal, I would have taken a beating. Papa said, so you met the marshal. What did you think of him? I told him he was a nice man. He'd brought me a bottle of soda pop. At the mention of soda pop, the blue eyes of my sisters opened wide. They started firing questions at me, wanting to know what color it was, and what it tasted like. I told them it was strawberry, and it bubbled and it tickled when I drank it, and it made me burp. The eager questions of my three little sisters had had an effect on my father and mother. Papa said, Billy, I don't want you feeling badly about the people in town. I don't think they were poking fun at you. Anyway, not like you think they were. Maybe they weren't, I said, but I still don't want to ever live in town. It's too crowded, and you couldn't get a breath of fresh air. In a sober voice, my father said, someday you may want to live in town. Your mother and I don't intend to live in these hills all our lives. It's no place to raise a family. A man's children should have an education. They should get out and see the world and meet people. I don't see why we have to move to town to get an education, I said. Hasn't Mama taught us how to read and write? There's more to an education than just reading and writing, Papa said. Much more. I asked him when he thought we'd be moving to town. Well, he said, it's some time yet, he said. We don't have the money now, but I'll be hoping someday we will. From the stove, where she was heating salt water for my feet, Mama said in a low voice, I'll pray every day and night for that day to come. I don't want you children to grow up without an education, not even knowing what a bottle of soda pop is, or ever seeing the inside of a schoolhouse. I don't think I could stand that. I'll just keep praying, and someday the good Lord may answer my prayer. I told my mother I had seen the schoolhouse in town. Again, I had to answer 1,000 questions from my sisters. I told them it was made of red brick and was bigger than Grandpa's store, a lot bigger. There must have been at least 1,000 kids going to school there. I told all about the teeter-totters, the swings made of log chains, the funny-looking pipe that ran up the side of the building, and how I'd climbed up in it and slid out like other kids. I didn't tell them how I came out. I think that was the fire escape, Papa said. Fire escape? I said. It looked like a slide to me. Did you notice where it made the bend at the top? He asked. I nodded my head. Well, inside the school there's a door, he said. If the school gets on fire, they open up the door, and the children jump in the pipe and slide out to safety. Boy, that's a keen way of getting out of fire, I said. Well, it's getting late, Papa said. We'll talk about some of this some other time. We better get to bed. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. My pups were put in the corn crib for the night. I covered them with shucks and kissed them goodnight. The next day was a busy one for me. With the hampering help of my sisters, I made the little doghouse. Papa cut the ends off his check lines and gave them to me for collars. With painstaking care, deep in the tough leather, I scratched the name Old Dan on one and Little Ann on the other. Now, guys, check lines are like you saw the picture I showed you of the cartoonish picture of the guy with the mule leading the mule to plow the ground. Well, the way that you lead, it would be like the reins of a horse. These check lines are leather straps, like little thin belts. that the farmer would hold in his hands to guide the mule, to control it right and left, gee and haw, they say, to change direction with the mule. So he cut the ends off so they'd be long enough for Billy to put around the necks of his dogs to make collars. With a nail and a rock, 2 holes were punched in each end with the straps. I put them around their small necks and laced the ends together with baling wire. And guys, that's just thin wire. That evening, I had a talk with my mother. I told her about praying for the 2 pups, about the magazine, and the plans I made. I told her how hard I had tried to find names for them, and how strange it was finding them carved in the bark of the sycamore tree. With a smile on her face, she asked, "Do you believe God heard your prayer and helped you?" "Yes, Mama," I said. "I know He did, and I'll always be thankful."